Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I was leaning over the kitchen counter, my hands pressed against the cool surface, when I felt his eyes on me. His voice was low, almost hushed, as though he was speaking only to the space between us. "You look tired." The words carried more weight than simple concern. They slid into me like a secret, stirring something I wasn't ready to name. I turned just enough to see him, my husband, standing close, his gaze steady, unreadable. The air tightened. His footsteps didn't echo, they throbbed softly, each one closing the distance until I could feel his breath brushing the side of my face. Before I could answer, his hands rested lightly on my shoulders. At first, it was gentle, a thoughtful gesture meant to soothe. But then, the pressure deepened. His thumbs pressed into the knots of tension with a precision that felt intentional, deliberate, knowing. My pulse quickened, betraying me. The room seemed to shrink around us. Every sound outside dulled, the tick of the clock, the hum of the fridge, all swallowed by the silence that existed only between his hands and my skin. His breath slowed, heavier now, and I felt him leaning closer. The warmth of his chest hovered just behind me, close enough to sense but not yet touching. I shut my eyes. Every push of his fingers, every slide across my shoulders, was saying something his lips hadn't dared to. It wasn't just comfort. It wasn't just kindness. It was a language of touch, one I understood too well. My body tensed, not to resist but to brace, waiting. Was he going to pull away with nothing more than a smile, leaving me restless with questions? Or was he going to let his hands wander lower, cross that fragile line we both knew existed between relief and desire? The suspense wrapped itself around me tighter than his hands ever could. I bit down on my lip, the question burning through me, the answer hanging in the space of his next breath. And then, his thumbs pressed deeper, rolling over the knots in my shoulders like he'd been waiting for this moment. My breath caught, shallow at first, then heavier, almost betraying the way my body leaned back into his touch. The heat between us wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, coiled, alive. His fingers slid slowly from the top of my shoulders down to the curve where my neck met my collarbone, tracing the shape as if memorizing it. I shivered, not from cold, but from the way his touch felt both careful and deliberate. He bent forward just slightly, his breath brushing the shell of my ear. "Better?" he whispered, his voice rough in a way that didn't match the softness of the question. I nodded, unable to find words, because my throat felt too tight. The moment stretched, his hands lingering too long, not pulling away, not easing the tension but feeding it. The room around us seemed to dim. Even the golden light hanging over the counter felt different, warmer, wrapping everything in a slow glow. His hand grazed the side of my arm, just a brush, nothing more, yet it sent a ripple through me, the kind that made my skin ache for more. I dared to glance back at him. His eyes caught mine, dark and unreadable, yet heavy with something I couldn't deny. The way he looked at me wasn't casual, wasn't routine. It was sharper, hungrier, as if he saw me not just as I was, but as something he'd been craving silently. My lips parted, but I couldn't form a response. His gaze dropped for a fleeting second, and I felt the heat of it travel down my skin like a secret touch. My heart pounded so hard I was certain he could hear it. Then came the accidental slip, his hand brushing lower along my arm until his fingers almost grazed mine. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. We froze there, suspended between restraint and surrender, each of us daring the other to move first. The air thickened. His breath deepened. My pulse throbbed at my temples. We were standing at the edge, both knowing what one small step forward would mean. And still, neither of us stepped back. The line between comfort and something more wasn't just close, it was right beneath us, waiting to be crossed. His hands lingered, as though they belonged there, molding to the shape of my shoulders, sliding with a pressure that felt too intentional to be innocent. Every stroke sent warmth flooding through me, and yet I held still, caught between wanting to lean back fully and forcing myself to resist. I could feel his chest just behind me, so close that the heat of him wrapped around me even without contact. His breath brushed the side of my neck, uneven now, like he was fighting something just as hard as I was. The silence grew heavier, filled only by the sound of breathing, mine quickening, his deepening, sinking in a rhythm that spoke louder than words. When his fingers drifted down, grazing the outside of my arm again, the touch was featherlight, almost testing. My skin tingled beneath it, aching for more, while my thoughts tangled in the danger of letting it happen. I should have stepped away. I should have said something. Instead, my hand twitched, betraying me, inching closer to where his fingers lingered. "Tell me if I should stop," he murmured, his voice low, raw, threaded with restraint. The words burned through me, daring me, and yet offering me the choice. My lips parted, but no answer came. Only a sharp inhale. Only silence. He leaned in closer, so close that I felt the warmth of his mouth hover near my skin, not touching, just there. Every second of hesitation only wound the tension tighter, like a string ready to snap. My body swayed back an inch, brushing against him, and the contact was enough to send a shiver racing through us both. The atmosphere was thick now, electric, almost unbearable. His grip on my shoulders tightened slightly, as though anchoring himself, or maybe holding me in place. I could sense his struggle in the way his hands trembled faintly, the way his breath hitched when my head tilted ever so slightly toward him. Every tiny move, every stolen glance, every shared breath built the fire higher, hotter, more dangerous. It felt as if we were balancing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would change everything, but unable to step away. And in that suspended moment, charged and trembling, it was clear, one more touch, one more breath too close, and the line between us would be gone. His fingers slid lower, brushing along the edge of my arm until they hovered just above my hand. The contact was fleeting, but it felt like fire racing under my skin. I froze, every muscle wired, every nerve awake. My breath stuttered as his hand lingered there, so close, like he was daring me to move first. The warmth of his chest pressed closer, the air between us vanishing until I could feel the faint rise and fall of his breathing against my back. It wasn't rough, it wasn't rushed, it was steady, heavy, full of something restrained yet dangerous. Each exhale grazed the back of my neck, making me shiver despite the heat building inside me. I tilted my head slightly, just enough that his lips hovered near the corner of my jaw. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. The proximity alone felt reckless, intoxicating. My pulse hammered in my ears, the sound mixing with the low rasp of his breathing. His hands tightened at my shoulders, fingers curling like he was holding back a force stronger than both of us. Then, slowly, deliberately, one hand slid down my arm again, this time stopping when his fingertips brushed against mine. The contact was small, almost innocent, but it shattered every boundary we tried to protect. I inhaled sharply. He heard it. I felt him lean closer, felt the tension ripple through him. His voice came low, husky, threaded with control fraying at the edges. "Do you want me to stop?" The question hung in the air like a spark over dry wood. My lips parted, but words refused to come. Instead, I turned my hand ever so slightly, letting my fingers graze his in answer. That tiny movement said everything. The atmosphere thickened, heavy and charged. My back pressed lightly into him, not fully, but enough to feel the unmistakable heat of his body behind mine. His breath hitched, and the sound alone nearly unraveled me. For a heartbeat, time stopped, two people on the verge of something that couldn't be undone. One more step, one more choice, and the line would be crossed. And then he leaned closer, his lips hovering a whisper from my skin, his hand closing softly over mine. The world held its breath. His lips hovered at the edge of my skin, so close that every exhale teased me like a secret. My fingers trembled in his grip, and still, neither of us pulled away. The silence was unbearable, thick, hot, dangerous, until the sharp sound of glass clinking shattered it. We both froze. On the counter beside us, a half-filled glass tilted dangerously near the edge. I must have nudged it without noticing, lost in him, in us. The glass wobbled once, twice, then fell, shattering across the kitchen tiles. The sound jolted through the air like a warning, like reality crashing down. I gasped and turned, but his hand shot out, wrapping firmly around my wrist before I could move. His grip was steady, strong, not forceful but commanding enough to stop me in place. "Don't," he whispered, his voice low, gravelly, charged with something darker than before. The broken glass lay scattered at our feet, but it was nothing compared to the shards of tension slicing through the room. I swallowed hard, caught in his stare. His eyes were darker now, almost unreadable, filled with conflict, wanting to hold on, terrified to let go. My heart raced faster, not just from desire, but from the sense that we had stepped into a place we couldn't retreat from. The moment was no longer soft. It was sharp, daring, reckless. He pulled me gently but firmly closer, guiding me just out of reach of the broken glass. Now there was no space left between us. His chest pressed against mine, his breath hot, his body tense like a coil about to snap. "I shouldn't," he murmured, but the way his thumb brushed the inside of my wrist betrayed him. His touch lingered there, tracing my pulse, feeling how wild it was, how alive. The more he said shouldn't, the more it felt like must. I tried to speak, to say something that might steady the ground beneath us, but the words died the moment his forehead rested against mine. Our breaths collided, shallow and unsteady, tangled like the thoughts neither of us dared voice. The broken glass glittered on the floor like scattered stars, a reminder of what could shatter next. But neither of us looked away. Neither of us stepped back. Instead, we stood suspended at the edge, trapped in something bigger than control, an unspoken vow that the next move would change everything. And still, neither of us let go. The silence between us finally broke, not with words, but with action. His grip on my wrist softened, sliding up my arm until his hand cupped the back of my neck. The motion was firm, desperate, like he'd stopped fighting the pull that had been building all along. And then it happened, our lips collided. Not tentative, not questioning, hungry. The kind of kiss that carried every unsaid word, every stolen glance, every restrained touch we denied for too long. Heat surged through me, fierce and consuming. My hands found his shirt, clutching it like an anchor, dragging him closer. His breath mingled with mine, ragged, fast, unstoppable. The world outside didn't exist anymore, just us, pressed together in the golden haze of the kitchen light, standing on shattered glass and fragile promises. His hands roamed with urgency, sliding from my shoulders down to the small of my back, pulling me flush against him. Every movement was sharper now, every touch bolder, no longer careful but claiming. I gasped into him, the sound swallowed by his mouth, and felt the trembling edge of control break apart between us. The air was thick with heat, with danger, with something that felt as terrifying as it was irresistible. We weren't resisting anymore, we were falling. And just when it seemed nothing could stop us, the sound of a door creaked open down the hall. We froze. My heart slammed in my chest, panic and desire twisting together. His hands still held me, his lips still hovered against mine, but now our eyes darted toward the sound. The hallway light spilled faintly into the kitchen, and in that moment, reality struck like lightning. We were no longer hidden. No longer safe. "Someone's here," I whispered, breathless, my voice trembling with both fear and the echo of what had just happened. His jaw clenched, his chest rising and falling against mine. He didn't let go immediately, his forehead pressed to mine one last time, lingering, unwilling to surrender. Then, with a slow, reluctant exhale, he stepped back. The shards of glass glimmered at our feet like evidence, the air still humming with everything we couldn't take back. And as the footsteps drew closer, the truth hit me like fire: whatever happened next would change everything. The footsteps grew louder, echoing down the hall like a countdown. My pulse throbbed at my temples, a mix of fear and fire burning through me. He still stood close, his hand lingering at my side as if refusing to let the moment end. But then, just before the shadow reached the doorway, he leaned into me one last time, his lips brushing my ear. "This isn't over." The words sent a chill racing down my spine, sharp and electric, sealing what had just happened into something that felt irreversible. I pulled back, steadying myself against the counter. My breath was shallow, my body trembling not from shock but from the memory of his kiss, his touch, the way his presence had consumed me. The broken glass still scattered across the floor like proof of how close we had come to losing control. When the figure appeared in the doorway, it was only a neighbor calling out, her voice casual, unaware of the storm that had just passed. Relief and panic tangled inside me, but I forced a smile, answering her with words that felt foreign on my lips. He, too, shifted back, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes burned with the same heat that still lingered inside me. Once the interruption faded, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier, alive with everything we hadn't said, everything we'd already crossed. I glanced at him, and in that brief exchange of eyes, the truth was undeniable. We couldn't undo what had happened. The line was no longer a line at all, it was a memory, etched into us both. And as I walked away, my heart still racing, my skin still alive with the echo of his touch, I knew his whisper was more than a promise. It was a warning. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot.